Welcome to the reality show, day 83 of the war in Israel. I'm joined by Robert Nasser, Morgan Carter, John Wass. We are today going to talk about we don't shy away from controversy on this channel, but I think we're probably outdoing ourselves here with this topic. So last Wednesday we had an episode of the reality show where the title of that was "The Palestinian People Are the Enemy." And we got to the issue of innocent civilians, and there was Robert wasn't actually on that episode, but he managed to trigger me in the live chat, and we had a very lively debate between me and him and John. Morgan, you were on that episode. You were, I think, the most calm person on that episode, and yeah, we are revisiting that topic, and I obviously have a lot to say, but I'm going to go to the one person who was not even on that show and yet managed to influence the conversation, I think, in a very positive direction. Robert.
Yeah, I wasn't even there. Why am I being blamed for this? No, it was interesting because John, I thought was right on target, and yet he had the minority opinion there. But I'll just start with a couple of points real quick. There is a contradiction in us saying, well, the death of innocent civilians, that's not the Israelis' fault. That's on the hands of the enemy. And yet we want to say simultaneously, oh, wait, there are no innocent civilians. No, no, we cannot hold both of those at the same time. It does not strengthen our stand to say there are no innocent civilians. It actually weakens our stand, and it trivializes the injustice of Hamas. It trivializes what the enemy is doing to their own people. It's an outrage they are willing to treat their own citizens as human shields, as cannon fodder. But why is it an outrage if their citizenry really is wholly guilty and there are no innocents? Well, then they're soldiers too. And this notion of being wholly guilty, that there are no innocent civilians, implies that there aren't, if not completely innocent people, lesser forms of guilt. There are people there who are less than evil. So I won't go too much further with that, but just to make my point clear, I wholly support Israel. I stand behind the IDF, even in cases where they find it necessary to kill civilians, and even in the cases, unfortunately, of friendly fire that we've seen. They are 100% in the right. And as our superfan Bonnie pointed out last week, the guilt for the death of any, and I acknowledge they are rare, but any innocent civilians is wholly on the hands of Hamas. I'll stop there and we can continue.
Yeah, so what was it that I was going to reply to? Just quickly, yeah, saying Hamas is responsible for innocent civilians and saying there are no innocent civilians is a contradiction. I would not say innocent civilians. I would say Hamas is responsible for the deaths of civilians. But yes, there is more to talk about. I'm going to go to John next, and yeah, let's continue.
Yeah, I pretty much echo everything Robert said. And I just, I mean, I made most of my case last week, I think. So I'm not sure what unless you want me to just restate that I think that, again, it doesn't matter how many innocent there are in regards to the war and Israel's right to defend itself. But I do believe there has to be a few, based on human free will, based on people like Mossad Hassan Youssef and Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Yanmai Park. How do those, if it's impossible for innocent to arise in these types of places, then how do you explain those people that come out of nowhere in the worst possible conditions? I mean, Yusuf Hassan or Mossad Hassan Youssef, I'm not sure. I've seen his name spelled two different ways, or organized two different ways. How is it possible someone like him developed in that kind of, not just in Gaza, but as the son of one of the cult leaders? I I can't deny that aspect of it.
Well, I
If
will.
I could respond to that, just because John brought up a point I was going to bring up, and he's beat me to it. We are not determinists. I'll leave it there. There's more to say, but I'm sorry. Go on.
Yeah, and I will answer some of the points you made, John, but I will go to Morgan first, and then I will respond.
Unfortunately, still got a bit of a cold, so excuse me if I cough occasionally. Yeah, I left the conversation last time. Razzie said I was the calmest, and I get maybe I was, but I left a bit frustrated because it felt like every time we were pinning down what exactly we were disagreeing on, it kind of evaporated a little bit. So it's useful to revisit this, I think. So I think part of the reason why it was kind of elusive was that what we were disagreeing about was elusive was because I think we ended up talking about, are there any innocent people at all? To which actually we weren't actually disagreeing about with that, for example, because we agreed very clearly there were innocent children, for example, that they couldn't be considered guilty at all. So then we were talking about the adult population. And there's, I guess there's a couple of things that I want to say about that. In the way of introductory remarks, I might end up talking for too long about that, but I think there are things that we can say where actually you can make a case that the adult population generally could well hold some responsibility for October 7th, and therefore wouldn't be considered innocent. Now, whether there comes an issue, I guess, of 100%. Can we say with certainty, are 100% of the adult population guilty or not? Which I suppose is the point you're getting to, John. And I kind of don't want to quarrel with that. There could well be individual people like the son, as you pointed out, who think differently, and that it would be a tragedy for these people to be killed. But there's fine points of dissection, I guess, that we need to get into. But that's my general kind of approach to it. I guess what I'll end up talking about, I think, in our conversation here is the degree to which we can say that the adult population generally holds responsibility for it. And there's a couple of books that I was prompted to revisit, which aren't actually about the conflict in Israel at all, but it's to do with the Holocaust. One in particular by Professor Daniel Goldhagen, who wrote a book called Hitler's Willing Executioners. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that book, but that's probably what I'll talk about a little bit, but maybe we'll come to that once we get into the meat of the conversation.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you criticized me on, Morgan, in the show last Wednesday was the fact that this was not on topic, but it was relevant. The fact that I read some many comments that were not super chats. Yeah, we are capitalists. We practice what we preach. We do prioritize super chats, but when there's something good or something that helps me get to a point I'm trying to make, then I will read it. And Boris makes a comment saying, I remember the video of the truck with the girl's mutilated body in the back being spat on by innocent Gazan children. I mean, this leads me to a point that I think is important for us to make. I said on the previous show, this is going to be a debate. It was a debate last week. I want to make clear, nobody here supports the Palestinians in this war. It's a debate on specifically the issue of innocent civilians in Gaza. Yeah, I'm sure a debate about Israel versus the Palestinians, who should you support, would do well in the ratings, but I have a limit to what I'm willing to entertain. I think the comparisons to the Nazis are valid here. I wouldn't have somebody on to say to debate whether or not the Holocaust was a good thing or a bad thing. And we're not going to debate who the right side in the war is. And I certainly know for a fact that neither Robert nor John support the Palestinians in any way. That's not what we're talking about. And even more so, I think the best argument for my point last Wednesday was actually made by you, John, and you kind of made it today as well, or alluded to it. So you were saying, in Nazi Germany, there were Germans, Aryan Germans, people who would be considered legitimate human beings by Hitler, who fought against the Nazi regime, hid Jews, risked their lives, and risk their lives knowing, of course, the Nazis would kill them if they found out, but also knowing that, in a war, they could be bombed by the people who they're on their side. They could have been bombed by their allies. I'm certain that such people died from Allied bombings. That happens in a war. But yeah, when we talk about the Palestinians, we need to talk about, the son of Hamas. We need to, single out one person here, one person there. This is so seemingly widespread among the Palestinians that you don't really see an opposition. Like you don't see that. You don't see parts of you see different organizations, Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad are different organizations. Even in Judea and Samaria, you see the PLO or the Palestinian Authority, as we're supposed to call them now, and they say in English at least that they sound more moderate or less bad, but they are the poll that we discussed last week showed that the majority in the West Bank, the majority in favor of October 7th is even greater than the majority in Gaza. So yeah, that is my general claim about the population there. But more importantly, something that I said that triggered Robert, and that's why I'm going to go to you next, Robert. But I think this should be discussed as well, is I said there are no innocents in the context of war. And I stand by that. There are no innocents in the context of war, as opposed to the context of if we were to take individually people in Gaza, have them stand trial as if it is not war, and see what crimes they committed. It could very well, there's no doubt there would be people who are innocent, because there are people who I'm sure just wake up in the morning and they have a bakery and they care about baking the best bread that they can bake, and nothing else matters to them. But they are living under a regime where it does have to matter to them. You can't ignore the fact that you are living under a regime that is dedicated to killing Jews and nothing else. And if you just bake bread, you're not to mention you're baking bread for terrorists, undoubtedly, and their supporters. But yeah, you cannot ignore that, because you're ignoring consequences, things that will have consequences to your life. And now those consequences are, now they're living those consequences. Robert.
Yeah, well, you say I was triggered. Okay, we'll say I was triggered. I would say I reacted to the idea that, you use the expression in the war sense. Well, that's worth discussing. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're having this discussion now. Tell me if you would agree with this statement. In war, there are no individuals.
I would agree with it. Again, in the context of how should a country that is a free country that is forced into war, how should it see the other side? Of course, it should see the other side as there are no individuals. In terms of the fact of reality, humans are individuals. So, but yeah, in the context of war, yeah, you cannot look at your enemy as individuals, because then you can't fight that war.
Okay. So now we know what you mean when you say in the war sense. We had already agreed on that. We had already agreed that even if there are innocents, and I could make that case, that's irrelevant to military strategy. And I agree. It's not irrelevant to this conversation. The last time we did this, when I was not in the room at the time, in the room meaning something a little different in the age of Zoom, but I wasn't in the room when that came up. But somebody in the comments afterward, somebody who viewed afterward, fortunately, I know we'll have thousands of views afterward since we're up against Yaron today. Somebody said, you shouldn't even be having this discussion. You shouldn't be talking this way. And he said that these claims of innocence of civilians should not be appealed to by the IDF. Now, his phrasing was a little bit funny there, but it was clear what he meant. And we agree. I agree. I think all four of us agree that, yes, nobody should appeal to the IDF and say, well, there are innocents out there. That's not what we're doing here right now. When the conversation, you're right, the conversation doesn't need to be had, because we all know, as Bonnie pointed out last time, the guilt of any quote unquote innocence, we can argue whether they even exist, is on the head of Hamas, on the head of the people who instigated the war, the aggressor. But when a conversation has already begun for the explicit purpose of stating, well, there are no innocent individuals in an enemy nation, that inaccuracy does not strengthen the case for military action. That inaccuracy weakens the case for military action. I know there are some people out there whose resolve would be weakened by this conversation. Their resolve would be weakened by considering the full context. But the resolve of far more people, the best people in our military, our intellectuals, the best people, their resolve will be strengthened by the additional clarity, by the full knowledge, by the deeper understanding, the whole truth. Moral certainty, because that's what we're talking about here. Moral certainty is a special instance of certainty more broadly. Moral certainty requires certainty, knowledge, truth. We can state our context for saying why innocent people must die. I don't think we clarify the issue to then say, well, in a war sense, there aren't any innocent people. Yes, the innocent people of Gaza, whether there are 2 or 200 or 2,000 among those 2 million people, they are our enemy because they are in an enemy nation in a time of war. I don't think it clarifies to say, and therefore they're not innocent in the war sense. This was a small point in a larger discussion where I agreed with 99% of what is being said, but I think we do ourselves damage, military damage, epistemological damage, moral damage, if we say, let's not acknowledge that there are innocent people. Let's not acknowledge that there might be an Ayn Rand still in Soviet Russia. Let's not acknowledge that the son of Hamas might actually turn out to be a good guy, or at least a reasonably good guy. Last night, I'm going on a bit, but real quick, last night in preparation for this discussion, I looked up, there's a concept of Muslim Zionists. And it turns out there are whole articles on them. There are essays. There's even a Wikipedia article listing Muslim supporters of Israel. And I thought, well, that's easy, but no, I want to be more specific. We're talking about, are there any innocent people in Gaza? So I don't want to see Muslims. I want to see Gazans, specific. Well, there's Mossab Youssef, the son of the Hamas founder. Good example there, but I wasn't satisfied. And I kept looking and I found there's a whole story. And it's great. It's on Fox News, whatever you think of them. But there is a whole story about a young generation of anti-Hamas activists in Gaza. And what makes the story both incredible and more believable, here's the whole headline: young generation of anti-Hamas activists in Gaza step up to serve, but are snubbed by UN aid groups. Now, if that doesn't go with the episode y'all just did half an hour ago, I don't know what is. You've got a young generation of anti-Hamas activists. There are people in Gaza who don't want Hamas. And the UN comes to provide aid and turns these volunteers away. It's a long story. I'll post the link afterward. They are there in Gaza. The rebels who, when they're found out, are often persecuted, sometimes jailed, sometimes outright killed. But just like it's more famous in the West Bank, they are also in Gaza. Does it weaken our military? You, the rest of the panel, all of you, answer me this. Does it weaken our military effort, or does it strengthen our resolve to acknowledge that in 2 million people, there may be 2 or 20 or 200 decent people in Gaza who remain there for whatever reason, because of their family, because of their situation, and that, yes, they may have to die. As we pointed out in regard to Nazi Germany, they accept that they may have to die. They understand when the bombs come on their head because they know they are in the aggressor nation. They know that comes with the job. Does it make us stronger to deny that those people exist and to just say, no, to hell with it. They're all evil. They're all guilty. There are no innocents. Does that make us stronger or weaker?
I will answer will give my answer after we go to John and Morgan. I will just say that I don't accept the premise, but I will also thank quickly our super chatters. Thank you, Jonathan Honig. And thank you, and again, proving that one can be on the show and super chat the same show at the same time. Robert Naser with a $2 super chat. Thank you. Oh, Hirschfeld. We will thank you for your super chat. We will get to your question later on in the show. And now, John.
I just wanted to make a follow-up point to that is I think that the innocent people that may exist, the few that there are in Gaza, would want the bombing to continue. It is what is going to save them. So if they are innocent in the sense we mean, then they would welcome the military action to free them from this death cult. So actually knowing that there are a few people there strengthens my resolve. It's an interesting point, Robert, that you make, that it actually weakens some people's resolve when it does the exact opposite with me. It gives a justification to what we're doing beyond just self-defense. But I largely think the Palestinian people are guilty, like more than 70%, 80, 90%. But that does not prove that there isn't one single innocent there. And I think by making that argument, you're turning people off to even listening, because when they hear you say 100% of adults, well, because first of all, like Morgan brought up, you've already conceded the fact that the children are largely innocent, probably on a scale, the older the kid gets, the more responsibility they can take. But I just lost my train of thought, I'm sorry. But the innocents in Gaza are far and few between, and they necessitate the war. They don't like justify not going to war, in my opinion.
By the way, the chat is very lively. I can't read all the messages. I will read all the super chats. I do want to say was it Aaron who got triggered by my use of the word triggered because it's a 10-year-old word. I will say don't be a snowflake. Morgan.
As to Robert's question as to whether it makes our resolve stronger or not, I'm not really sure whether it does. I could see a case for one's resolve being weakened by the presence of innocence there, because you don't want to kill innocent people. But I can also understand what John's saying. So it's not really clear to me either way. But to the main part of my point, I guess, I was a bit unusual, I think, in my education in Britain, in that I ended up studying 4 years of Nazi history, which was a bit weird. And we ended up doing a special topic about the Holocaust and all these kind of historiographical debates. And one of the books that we considered kind of at length, it was by this guy, Professor Daniel Goldhagen, which was written in the 90s. It was called Hitler's Willing Executioners, which is a very controversial book. And it doesn't get brought up so much anymore, but people might know the book to which it was responding, which was a book that Jordan Peterson promotes, or has promoted very much in recent years, which was called Ordinary Men, and which was about kind of ordinary German soldiers in the Second World War, and is kind of combating the idea that only the SS were people who went around and executed the Jews. And Ordinary Men points out that actually ordinary German soldiers and ordinary German policemen actually participated in the murder of the Jews quite extensively. And it's considering kind of how does this happen, and it kind of looks at the psychology. And Daniel Goldhagen wrote his book in response because he agreed with that, that ordinary people did do it, but Ordinary Men kind of almost is excusing them. And Goldhagen's, in his title, Hitler's Willing Executioners, is kind of making the point that actually people are responsible for the banality of evil. That even if they aren't these kind of extraordinary monsters on the scale of Joseph Mengele or something like that, that they're still culpable. One, if they take an action, but they're also culpable for their indifference. And so there's a quote, which I haven't actually been able to track down the original version of, but by Ian Kershaw, who's one of the major historians in this area, where he says that the road to Auschwitz was built by hate, but paved with indifference. And in the case of Gaza, whether the road to October 7th was paved with indifference or not, I think is probably not even the case. What we actually see is a lot of paving of active support or collaboration. And what we were considering partly in our conversation last time was the reports that potentially a lot of civilians actually stormed the border and went in and participated. So I think if you accept the idea that people are responsible, not just for the actions that they take, but they're also responsible if they are indifferent, or if they're not upstanding but they're bystanding, if you ever hear that distinction, then I think actually we do find, if you look at the Gazan population, a generalized responsibility for what's happened amongst the adult population. Now, I can't say with definitive, certainty that 100% you'll never find anyone amongst that population who believes otherwise. But I think that you do have to hold them responsible if they're not actively opposing. Now, that's obviously a problem because they live in a state where they can't actively oppose. They'll be killed if they do that. So you get into real problems here. But I think that basic kind of framework is why I would look at this debate and think that actually you can say that that the adult population in Gaza is generally responsible for what's happened.
Yeah, so let me reiterate my position, which is, statistically, I think it's nearly impossible. There's nobody in Gaza who supports Israel. I mean, I'm sure there are people who actually want Israel to win in Gaza. There's no doubt in my mind. The question is, and I come back to that phrase, in the war context. So Robert, you said something to the effect of, does it hurt our effort if we or our resolve if we acknowledge that there could be another son of Hamas or another Ayn Rand in Gaza? So acknowledging the possibility is one thing. Even acknowledging if we actually knew of somebody like that, that's also one thing. And if there was such a person, I'm sure if you could contact Israel and get out in some way, they would do that. If Israel was knew that there are terrorists around where that person is, and then didn't bomb the terrorists, that would be a whole different thing. And of course, what Israel does is actually actively claim, and this is why this topic is important. It is Israel's position that there is Hamas and there is innocent Palestinians, innocent civilians, and that is absolutely not an okay way to look at it when you're trying to fight a war. And it's not an okay way, and it is costing Israeli lives. The fact, as we mentioned, I think in the previous show, that there are still rockets nearly 3 months after the October 7th attack, still rockets being fired from Gaza at Israel. That is because Israel is thinking about innocent civilians on the Palestinian side. The fact that I don't know the latest number, but close to 200 soldiers have been killed in the ground in the ground operation in Gaza. 100% of those soldiers would be alive today had Israel decided that the war should be fought as if there are no innocent civilians in Gaza, because in the war context, there are no innocent civilians in Gaza. And there are civilians, and some of them might not be okay with it. Some of them might not have been among the people who, when they found out that the fence had gone down in a few places, marched through, risking their own lives just in order to kill Israelis or take them hostage, or who didn't, go out in the streets and celebrate when they heard what happened, or attack the hostages, attack dead bodies, like kicking a dead body. This is the culture that they're in, and this is, I think, the majority. But the fact that the vast majority, but the fact that some didn't do that is completely irrelevant in the war context. Robert.
I could not disagree more wholeheartedly, because I think the conclusion or the policies you're trying to get to can't be gotten to by lying to ourselves. You say we need to fight as if there are no individuals. Call it that if you want. That doesn't change the fact that there are. Yes, they absolutely should fight as if individuals are not to be taken into account. Are you saying that, well, because some of us out there are willing to actually confront the reality that there are innocents on the other side, that lessens their resolve? That's why Israel won't do the right thing? Because some of us are willing to acknowledge there are innocent people? If that's the case, the war is already lost. If we have to lie to ourselves, if we have to act as if something is true, even though it's not, then we've already lost this war. And we are not helping the cause by fighting for the government to act as if. No, We should be able to say there are innocents and they need to be ignored, that they will die. And the cost of that is on the head of Hamas, on the head of the enemy. It does not strengthen our resolve to say, well, look at the videos. The vast majority of the people in Gaza are pro-Hamas. Look at, you keep using the word the majority, and then it becomes not the majority, as if there's a minority of innocents out there. But no, it's the vast majority. It's so many that what, we're then going to make the leap to say there are no innocents? I'm not saying because there are innocent people, they need to be taken account. It sounds like you're saying because we're saying there are innocent people, those idiots in Israel will take it into account. Is that what we're talking about here? We cannot use plain language. We cannot acknowledge that there are individuals in a war, even though our military strategy needs to be, we can't focus on individuals. We need to defeat the country at large. We can do that. We can say that. We don't need to say the wrong thing. We don't need to say, forget about the truth, as if there are no innocents. No. How is it not possible to say, yes, there are innocent people. Yes, they're going to die. No, that's not going to change our military strategy. If you think saying, no, there aren't any innocents is going to help Israel's resolve, I would ask you to check that premise.
So before I go to John and then Morgan, and then we're going to go to O's super chat and to another comment or two in the chat. Robert, I want to just ask you, so, and if you're watching and you haven't read Atlas Shrugged, this might go over your head, but and you should read it. The train scene, the train crash scene in Atlas Shrugged. Were they innocent? To what extent were they innocent? And yeah, your thoughts on the individuals that Rand wrote about in that novel.
I am glad you chose that example. Not only did they all share some degree of blame, but they also didn't share the same degree of blame. In fact, the story is told on a level of kind of a trivial, kind of slightly disgusting comment from a passenger to the highest levels of blame. And that is something that's missing from this discussion too. We want to say, you gave the example last week. I don't mean to kind of hold things over your head, but since you brought it up, I mentioned that, there are people who have been put in jail or even killed for being Israeli collaborators. And you made what I found kind of an outrageous point, even though it was true, which is, well, if they were collaborators, if they had information to offer the Israelis, then they must have been on the inside. They must have been guilty to some degree anyway. That to me is an extraordinary statement to make because there's some truth to it. But you're going to suggest that they're not innocent. They're guilty. They're just like Hamas. They're just like Hezbollah. But no, the great thing about the sequence of the train going into the tunnel is that those people all had some share of the blame, but they were not all equally guilty. The very first people who are mentioned are just practically misinformed, almost innocent or less guilty. So it's a great example. We are making the mistake of saying, well, because there are young children who think they want to grow up to kill Israelis, they are the same as the people in Hamas. They are guilty. They deserve to die. And make no mistake, by saying the majority equals all guilty, then you're saying, yeah, the 6-year-old kid deserves a bullet in the brain now, today. Everybody on that train going into that tunnel, no, it wasn't happenstance where Ayn Rand was saying the things that they believed were responsible for it. No, every one of them deserved for somebody from the valley to go put a bullet in each of their brains, like we do in war. This is not that. This notion of everybody who is not squeaky clean is wholly guilty is the same level of evil, forgetting Leonard Peikoff's brilliant explanation of how not everything bad is evil. That is a mistake. And this situation cannot be understood in any other terms, even in the war sense. There's a reason why we don't drop nukes on Gaza. And it's not just because, well, the radiation, the fallout would hit Israel.
as far as I'm concerned, it's just because the radiation would hit Israel. But I will answer some of those points in a bit. John.
Yeah, I I'm not sure what else I have to say. I think that Robert's completely right. Uh, the the train scene is a good example of the levels of culpability or guilt that people assume when they live under a government. But Ayn Rand wrote that scene and put those people on that train for a purpose. There's a reason she didn't put John Galt on that train or Dagny or any of the heroes. Um, and to say that that scene proves that it's impossible for there to have been one in reality is kind of strange. But I think that having watched a lot of stuff on cults, and especially cults that go on for generations, it's just more complicated. Like Robert says, it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that these people don't have free will until they're a certain age or something. Like, I don't know. I just think that we don't need to focus on this subject only in the sense of, like Robert says, to not deny reality. I believe Palestinian culture, the Palestinian people, the Gazans are at whole, at large, guilty of this war, but that doesn't mean 100% of the individuals within are 100% guilty. And the children are the best example, especially growing up in a cult.
So before I go to Morgan, let me just say, because we have more live viewers than usual, if you find value in this content, then please do like this video, share it, subscribe to the channel. At the moment, all we're talking about is the war in Israel and different aspects of it. So yeah, there is more. And if you're as triggered by us as I am by some of Robert's comments, then or Robert is by some of mine, or some people in the chat are by me using the word triggered, then also stay tuned and we will continue to trigger you. Morgan.
I wouldn't like to accept the premise that anything requires lying to oneself. So as to whether there's any individuals in Gaza, of course there are individuals. That doesn't mean you act differently in a context of wartime than you might in peacetime in regards to into how you should act justly. But I don't want to deny that there are individuals, because metaphysically, of course, there are. I think the basic point comes down to this, that so the children, I don't think, are guilty, even ones who you may have seen do something really awful, like spitting on the corpse of someone. Unfortunately, they're not really at an age where I think you generally consider them culpable in the full sense for their actions. And as you kind of said, John, they've been raised in a cult-like environment. So I don't have any trouble agreeing to that at all. But focusing on the adult population, who certainly are culpable for their actions, even though they may have been raised in that context. I think the point is this, that for the adult population to be considered innocent, you need to be an active opposer or an active resistor, that any kind of indifference or neutrality is what enables the bad thing to happen. And I suspect you probably don't disagree with me on that. That's the Edmund Burke comment that all that's required for the victory of evil is for good men to do nothing. It's a very common kind of idea. And the examples that we picked, I think, go to that. So the son of one of the Hamas founders is an active resistor to the regime that his father helped create. So we picked him as an obvious example of someone who's innocent, right? And I think that's a good example. And so if you were to show to me someone from the adult population in Gaza who's an active opponent of what's going on, then I completely agree that that person's innocent. But unfortunately, someone who might, within the privacy of their own mind, say, yeah, Hamas are awful, I really don't like them, but then be doing nothing about it, I don't think that we can classify them as innocent, unfortunately. They, it seems, are part of what enables the regime to continue. And so imagine even if the majority of the population in Hamas were like that, kind of in the privacy of their own home, in the privacy of their own mind, they thought, oh, Hamas are terrible, but they did nothing about it. That is what would enable the regime to continue. So that just seems to be an important point to me, that what you need is that, again, that kind of almost cliche phrase, you need to be upstanding, not bystanding.
But that's why I believe that a vast, vast majority is guilty, because of that premise, that just sitting back is also a form of guilt.
For sure. Well, look, I mean, and then we don't disagree about that. But then, as to whether there's kind of not one person, if you can show me there's such a person, then that's completely fine. But otherwise, we're almost speculating a bit.
It's almost an arbitrary discussion, because neither side can prove definitively that there is or there isn't.
Well, I can.
There was a question given to Yarn Brook the other day about, we saw a pretty heavy resistance to the Nazis in Nazi Germany. So where is the resistance to the Palestinians in Gaza? And he said, well, there is one. I believe he believes there is a resistance. It's just they're probably so defeated, based on examples like Robert just gave about the UN turning down activists that don't support Hamas. I think they feel completely abandoned by the world, and the UN and the United States, as they continue to tell Israel to stop bombing the people that they probably agree with should be bombed. So I was going to ask you, Morgan, actually along this line, thinking how known was it during World War II that there were so many assassination attempts on Hitler? Do you know anything about that? Because now in the future here, we know of dozens of attempts to kill him. Movies have been made about it. So, but was it well known then? I would just, if I remember correctly, Hitler did everything in his power to hide that fact.
So I don't, my knowledge on that particular point isn't as fresh as I'd like it, but it was something that was brought up when I was at school. I certainly remember. I think they tried to hide some of them, but inevitably some of them were public enough, and they were kind of spun, if I'm remembering correctly, in a kind of way that, isn't
God, yeah,
isn't he superhuman? He's resisted these attempts and so on. And resistance in Nazi Germany because of the nature of Nazi Germany being a totalitarian state, is one thing that's very hard to measure. So it likely also in Gaza, it's hard to measure, because it's not like there's any official opposition like you would get in a free country, right? But and there's certain groups that you do know about despite that, like the Edelweiss Pirates, or I think is it the White Rose Society at the University of, I think it was either Berlin or Munich. But so anyway, so that's that. But I think Robert had something to say.
By the way, just quickly a couple of points. So we are going to do an episode of our other daily show, The Daily Objective, sometime probably next week, about the Palestinians and Nazi Germany, a cultural comparison, which I think is hopefully going to be as interesting as I think it's going to be. Thank you, Ginger, for the generous super chat. I've read in the comments in the recent week and in the past as well, that we're funded by billionaires, we're funded by the state of Israel. I think somebody accused us of being funded by the Tory party, which would be interesting considering how we talk about them. We are actually funded by members of the Ayn Rand Center UK. You can become a member and enjoy content that you can't see on the channel. There's a link in the description in a live chat, and by people who support us on shows. So thank you, Ginger, for your continued support. She says, I believe in the train sequence, she's showing how we all take the consequences of evil, even when we aren't directly the cause. And yeah, on that point, I want to just go back to that quickly. So, Robert, you said they were guilty to different degrees, or they're not innocent at different degrees. And yeah, I go back to my example of the baker in Gaza who just wants to bake the best bread that he possibly can, and that's a worthwhile cause, although I don't know if it's healthy, but in a free country you decide what you want to eat. That's a worthwhile cause if you are living in a free society. If you're living in a society that is that is a totalitarian regime that has one goal, which is killing others, then again, that argument of innocence, you need to understand that argument of innocence goes out the window in a war context. And the war context is the context that you should always assume is the case, even when there's no active war, because your regime wants nothing more than to cause that war. Let me go quickly to you, Robert, for a response. Afterward, we'll go around quickly to John and Morgan, and then there's a couple of comments in the chat. The chat we'll go to before we wrap up.
Well, that's really the point of disagreement. When you say the argument of innocence goes out the window, I could not disagree more. The relevance of innocence goes out the window. And I have no desire to talk about it unless somebody brings it up. And if they bring it up, don't tell me the argument goes out the window. The relevance goes out the window. We don't have to take that quote unquote innocence, whether it's really there or not, into account. But if we're going to talk about it, then we need to talk about it factually. Now, I just want to take a second because, and you'll probably do this too. It's been amazing what's been happening on the Ayn Rand Center UK channel. And we have always, of course, deserved an audience in the thousands, in the tens of thousands. Well, lately we've got it. Well-deserved, outstanding, could not be happier. It's a little weird that the jank who cried genocide is our episode at 42,000 views, but it was a great discussion about an interesting debate between this bit of a clown and Douglas Murray, who was great to hear in that discussion. But it's coming in at number 3, the Palestinian death cult, an important conversation on the channel, coming in at number 4 with 15,000 views. 15,000 on YouTube, that's not that much. 15,000 in 1 week was the earlier discussion. The Palestinians are the enemy. Well, the Palestinians are the enemy. The Palestinian people are the enemy. Are they all guilty? Different question. If you want to say those are the same question, then yeah, we'll probably agree. But what I really wanted to say real quick, because now that we've got thousands of people watching these videos, as well they should, I think we can agree that Israel, the nation of Israel, is wholly in the right in this war. They deserve our wholehearted 100%. I don't know if you even say wholehearted, that makes it sound emotional. They should reserve our absolute moral certainty and support. Hamas needs to be ended, and they need to be ended in a way that breaks the will of the Gazan people. And they will never want that type of leadership or kind of ideology again. I think all of us on the Ayn Rand Center UK support that. That's what we're fighting for. It's why we're having these discussions. We are hoping to have our impact here in the United States. Our support should be 100%. Joe Biden has fortunately been better than our college students in that regard, even though he has been far weaker than he should be. He sent our largest aircraft carrier to the Mediterranean Sea. Why have we not stepped on Gaza in whatever manner required? Well, Israel's doing that way too slowly, way too carefully, but it is happening. I just wanted to make the point because we have so many good people. I don't even know if they're good people. So many interested people visiting the channel. We are 102% behind the nation of Israel in this war. I don't argue this fine point to weaken anybody's resolve in any way. I think the clarity strengthens our resolve by understanding there are innocent people in Gaza. Again, maybe it's a handful. You decide for yourself how many you believe, but that's all on the head of Hamas. It's all the more reason why we need to fight. It's all the more reason why the Hamas deserves as much moral and emotional condemnation as you can muster, and all the more reason why Israel needs to be supported.
Yes, and also thank you, Buster Jones, for the super chat. Let me just quickly say, because we do have new viewers, and I've said, Yaron Brook needs no introduction to our most of our audience, but maybe some of our new viewers who don't know him. If you are now a new regular viewer of this channel because of our content on Israel, there is no better commentator on the Middle East than Yaron Brook. He will be joining me tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. UK time, 12:30 p.m. Eastern, to talk about how Israel can defeat the Palestinians. You should really join in for that. And okay, let me quickly go to John and Morgan, and then we will go to Hirschfeld, a super chat from before, which I left for later because it was a little bit off topic, although it's still on the topic of the war. John.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Robert said, is that just because you believe that the Palestinians are the enemy doesn't mean you have to believe 100% of the individuals are 100% guilty. So, and I think that we should be talking more about how the innocents in Gaza would likely welcome being freed from the Palestinian death cult. And so the fact that I state that there could be a few possible innocent people has no bearing on how I think Israel should act. In fact, I think it makes Israel's actions even more important. And even if Mossad Hassan Youssef does exist in there, that is not a reason to discontinue fighting. And in fact, I think that person would welcome more fighting because it would be helping them overthrow who they're trying to overthrow.
Yeah, and I'll reiterate again, this is not a debate about who's right and wrong in the war. This is not that is not a debate you would see on this channel. I've watched such debates from others. I understand there's some value to it. I have a limit to what I can tolerate, and arguments in favor of the Palestinians is not that. And of course, nothing John and Robert said is anywhere near that. So yeah, the disagreements are relatively minor, I think, in the context of war. Let's put it that way. Morgan.
Just to conclude, I suppose. I don't think we disagree that there are innocent people in Gaza, and the children are a good example, just because it's a clear and easy example. But amongst the adult population, I think we have to take very seriously that there's a generalized responsibility and a generalized guilt, unless there's active resistance. And if you can point to me a kind of French resistance or Underground Railroad kind of organization, then I'm completely happy to say that those people are innocent people. Unfortunately, I think the people underground in Gaza are the bad people, not the good people. So that's why I think that generally we're able to say that unless you, and I'm happy to be proven wrong about this, but until you can point to someone who's actively opposing, I think that the people who support the regime and the people who are bystanding are culpable for what's happened.
Yeah, I did want to quickly touch on the fact that somebody earlier said in the chat, the elephant in the room are the hostages in Gaza. Yes, they are innocent. I think, if Israel did what it should have done on October 7th, many, if not all of them, would have died, and they would be much like other civilians, if you want to call them innocent or not, certainly the children. All of them are victims of Hamas, and I think that is something we all agree on. So Hirschfeld, thank you for the super chat earlier. He says, as an Israeli, how should we explain in the most effective way the Israeli position for my friends in the US, the UK, etc.? That's a very, very good question, and question we've been trying to do that on this channel since October 7th, and before we've done episodes on Israel before. I think it's clearly a question of good versus evil, and that doesn't mean you necessarily agree with everything that Israel does internally or externally or whatever. It means that if you look at what kind of a society Israel is and what kind of a society Palestinians are, there's no question there on, ask them where they would rather live, in a Gaza, not under attack by Israel, just run as Hamas would like to run it, or Israel itself. That's a good question to ask. I would say, although I wasn't too happy with my with that episode, I did an episode on Christmas Day, a Christmas message to the people of Israel, and I went through a bit of Israel's history and looking at how Israel can be optimistic, although I am not optimistic considering how they are fighting. But yeah, look at the fact that Israel has been under attack since hours after it announced independence by all its Arab neighbors, and that attack is still going on in a slightly different form, but it's the same war to wipe the Jews off the map in the Middle East. That has failed continuously. The Jewish state is the envy, or is the envy of any good person elsewhere in the Middle East. And so yeah, that's how I would put it. And if they disagree, if they and they're living in the U.S. or the U.K., they are also living in countries that don't that aren't operating according to their values, and they should consider, if they're uncomfortable with Gaza, moving to the West Bank, moving to Iran, moving to one of those countries that really operate according to their values. All right, let's go quickly around one more time. Robert, any parting words?
No, I think I've made my point. I think it's kind of a fine point we're debating. I thought it was more important to go back to what we all agree, our support for Israel. And let me say, I think the Christmas episode was actually pretty good, and it's gotten well over 1,000 views. 1,277, of course, deserves 12,000 instead. So, folks, if you haven't seen it yet, Razi's show on Christmas Day, give that a look.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, I think one thing, as per the question that was just asked, is just have these people read the Hamas charter and then the Israeli constitution. Well, they don't really have a constitution. Whatever it's called, the charter of laws that Israel has. Read those. You get an idea of the values and the goals of each side, and then you tell me which one is the good and which is the evil.
Morgan.
I don't think I need to maybe state my position any further, but just to whoever was commenting that we were funded by billionaires, please, if you know any billionaires, do send them our way. That'd be greatly appreciated. And then as to how to best communicate to people how the case for Israel, unfortunately, I think a lot of the support that the Palestinian cause, if you want to put it that way, ends up getting is basically due to kind of a historical ignorance, which I suppose is the point you're getting at, Razi. So if you can find a way to just briefly state a couple of historical facts about Israel always being on the end of the aggression and of being the victim of aggression, and then maybe you want to kind of a bit opportunistically use the idea of victim blaming, then I think probably that would have a lot of purchase on people. That would be my best suggestion.
Well, we'll need to leave that for another day, but I want to, reiterate your point that billionaires should be funding us. You know, you stop funding your enemies, stop doing what the U.S. and Israel do, which is, stop sending fuel to the people who will use it to destroy you. We are on the side of individuals everywhere, including individuals in places where during a war you should not consider them individuals. And we're certainly on the side of anybody who has reached that level of success. So yeah, billionaires, call me. Thank you, Bijo, for the 7 South African rands in the super chat. That is the best named currency in the world. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Once again, if you see value in this content, please share it, like it, subscribe. If you are watching not live or live but had something else to say, comment in the comment section. I know we missed a lot of the comments that went on live because we were talking to each other, but we will look at the comments later on and engage in them. So thanks, guys, for joining me. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you back here tomorrow for the Daily Objective and the reality show. Until then, goodbye.